Welcome everyone to tonight's Event Tech Talks. Thank you for making the time to come and take part in this session. Today we're going to be the discussion, is going to be on beyond Q&A, how can we engage attendees further. Before I get the panel to introduce themselves, for anybody who doesn't know, the shortlist for the Event Technology Awards has just been announced. So congratulations to anybody that was shortlisted that's in the room. And if you want to see what the shortlist is, eventtechnologyawards.co.uk, and there's a shortlist button at the top. Obviously tonight is about question and answers. So as we've already mentioned, if you haven't already logged onto the Me Too system, please do fire the questions to these guys. If it's directed at somebody in particular, please mention who it's aimed at, and that makes it a little bit easier for me. And if you want to go really old school, we have one of these crowd mics that we can throw to if you want to put your hands up and ask questions that way. We're going to start off with a quick poll to get general feel for how people do Q&A at the moment, what your thoughts are on Q&A, and then we'll get these guys to introduce themselves and go straight into the discussion. So I believe if we go to the first question, guys. So do you currently include specific times for Q&A sessions at your meetings and events? Do you do it always, sometimes, or never? I believe we've got a little countdown maybe. Can't hear the sound, but, and then we'll go to the overall feedback. Everybody taken part?
We need to, I reckon a couple still connecting.
You got it on your thing.
Yeah. And it's a couple of us as well.
And if we can go to the results, guys. Very interesting. You only introduce it sometimes, and 5% of you do it never, which is interesting. Hopefully you're here to learn how to do Q&A and engage attendees. Can we go to the next question, guys? How do you enable Q&A? You can select more than one on this. So if you use multiple tools like we are doing tonight, we're using Q&A software. We've got microphones, throwable microphones. If you use handhelds, that's all counts. Please let us know. Choose as many as you currently use. Can we go to the answers, guys? Oh, sorry. We're starting responses, aren't we? My apologies. We've also got a counter here so we can tell if anybody's still waiting to partake. So out of that, a lot of you use it as part of an event app, which is probably an interesting discussion for another time, but keypads, clickers on the lower side. Microphones seem to be the least used, which is obviously an indication of how technology is kind of advancing how we engage with people. Oh, sorry, hands on roving mic is actually large, is that right up there? Okay, next question, guys. Typically, how successful do you feel that Q&A sessions are? Not at all, below average, average, above average, or extremely?
Got a slightly different scale.
Oh, sorry, have I skipped along?
You can, the questions are the same, but the options are slightly different.
Oh, right, sorry. You did mention that to me earlier, didn't you, David? Sorry. Quite painful. Depends on the audience on compulsive viewing. This will set the tone for this session.
Yeah.
So it depends on the audience. Only a few of you feel that it's quite painful. About 20% vote for compulsive viewing. And the next one, the next slide, we'd love to hear your thoughts on why. So if you have any thoughts, please submit or explain those reasons. the last question on the Me Too discussion board, and then we can discuss them as part of this panel discussion. So over to introducing the panel. Let these guys introduce themselves because they'll do a much better job at it than me. Peter, we'll start off with you. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Adam. So hi, my name is Pete Eyre. I am a CMO at Me2, which is the app we're using today. So we're fully immersed in Q&A and looking at the future of that and how to shape it. So we're here as much to learn as we are to talk about our experiences. My experience before being in Me2 was in meeting technologies. I was the MD of IML in Australia and the MD of Lumi in the UK. So I've had a career focused on bridging the gap between an audience and the speaker and between each other, and using innovative tech to do that. So yeah, the IML, the company I worked for originally, actually provide the handsets that are embedded in the arms of the chairs in here. And here we are today doing the same technology through an app. Been lucky enough to be move around the world, looking at all types of engagement technologies, different environments, whether in the room, online, and lots of different subject materials as well. So different demographics of people and how they want to interact. So hopefully a lot of experience there. And on a personal note, I love learning through people's experiences, their anecdotes and their stories. I've got a really short attention span, so a good Q&A session for me is absolute gold. A bad one is absolute torture. So, and that's how I measure them in my head. So that's me. Over to
Chris.
Cool, thank you very much. So my name's Chris Elmett. Nice to see you all. I'm Managing Director of Crystal Interactive. There was a younger and better looking guy from Crystal Interactive who was supposed to be here today, but sadly Rob was taken unwell, so I subbed in for him. Crystal Interactive, for those of you who don't know, do three things. The first thing is that we partner with companies to bring technology into live events. So we scour the world and form partnerships with companies who've got great technology that we think our clients would like to use in their events. And that's how we know people like Pete. We're a partner of Me2's and delighted to be them. The second thing that we do is we provide people on site to make that technology work. So we do about 700 events a year. We have a team of just about 30 technology specialists who fly literally all over the world, making sure that technology works seamlessly in those live events. And then the third thing that we do is that we provide advice to clients in the run-up to the event so that they can think really carefully and clearly about what they're trying to get out of the technology when it comes into the live event. So three things: the technology, the people on site, and the advice to get the best out of it. The list of technologies that we provide is growing. I have another hat as well, which is slightly relevant to this conversation, which is, as well as running Crystal Interactive, I also, in my own right, facilitate conferences on all sorts of topics, from medical research through to town planning, through to anything that anyone will pay me to get on a stage for. So I've actually moderated more than my fair share of Q&As, and hopefully bring some of that experience to this conversation as well.
I'm going to sit down there, then you can take.
Yeah,
no chance. No, I said who'd pay me to do it. I don't know.
Stop.
And Richard, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody as well?
Certainly, yes. I'm Richard Hingley. I'm the creative director at DRP Group. We're a communications agency. Communications for many corporate companies, certainly around the UK, both internal communications and also external. We have a team of about 200 people working across live events, virtual events, exhibition, video and digital as well. As Group Creative Director, I'm not so worried about the technology as much, it's about the experience for me. So in terms of what we do for live events, it's all about the experience and what we get from that, and from our client's perspective, the return on investment from that particular event they put on. Q&A plays a part in that, or certainly in terms of the sort of analytics we get from the sort of work we do. I've been in the business sort of about 25 years, always through creative, and for me, experience is everything. So that's that.
Thank you very much. Well, guys, thank you for taking part tonight. I appreciate you giving up your time. To set the scene, before we get to the bit that comes after Q&A and how we engage attendees further using the tools and maybe after the event, I think we should look at kind of what current practices there are and what tools and things there are available to us at the moment. I'm going to pass this back to Richard. How does DRP go about deciding what the right tool is to use in a situation for an event? Because as we saw earlier, we've got lots of available technologies. We've got Me2 platforms, hardware platforms like Crystal Interactive, the IML systems. Yeah. We've even got the old school, stick your hand up, ask a question. Yeah. How do we go about deciding what we'd use in a situation like that?
Well, usually my first point of call is Q&A needed? That's normally my first question, and quite often it's a staple diet of a brief that says Q&A needs to be in there. And often it does, but actually when you question it sometimes what the client's trying to achieve, Q&A won't help them do that. So we always start at sort of questioning the brief and what the value of what they're going to do, and that's important to us before we go back and then look at how we may put something into place, how we execute that Q&A in obviously various different ways.
Is there a format that comes out more than others? Is there one that kind of rises to the top that says there's a theme of, right, this is the way to do Q&A Q&A is the right thing to do,
yeah.
This is the way that we're going to produce it?
Over time it's changed, certainly. So these guys talk about it when microphone was the way forward and everyone sort of getting people to have a conversation. That actually still applies a little bit because sometimes the uniqueness of that, because the digital takes over and sometimes the more personal humanisation of actually asking questions is really important. And it depends on the audience as to whether sort of how tech we go with it or how we call it old school, we go with it in terms of having sort of a conversation with an audience. So it depends on the audience, internal, external. Have they gone there for specifically a Q&A, or is it part of a larger event and it's almost unexpected and we turn it to something more interesting? So it's once again back to the brief and sort of what we're trying to achieve with it.
Okay. Chris, do you have anything to add? You've obviously moderated and spoken at many conferences, and you're also a supplier yourself.
Yeah.
Do you use Q&A technology, or how does that play a role when you're actually moderating a session for another event?
So in terms of, Q&A, as Richard said, is not always needed, but it is frequently needed. So let's assume that it is needed. Then the question is, what tool do you use for that particular Q&A session? And for me, there's really 4 decision points. So the first one is budget. If your client has absolutely no money, then there are certain things that you do and certain things that you can't. The second one is the audience profile. So in an audience like this, we're in London, I can't see anyone older than me. I know that half of the people here work in interactive technology. I think we're probably pretty safe to use our own devices. And certainly, if there was something really, really important that we had to do, handing out a couple of spare devices would probably cover this audience. But for a lot of conferences, that isn't the case. You've got people who don't fit that age profile, aren't happy to engage with technology on their own devices because they say, look, it's my phone, it's not your phone. So don't ask me to use my phone for what you want me to use it for, what you want to use it for. So that's the second thing, is the audience. The third thing is the size. So if you've got any system that's using Wi-Fi, I would say you're probably, if you're really careful, you're probably good up to a few hundred, but I wouldn't go into the thousands with Wi-Fi. I just think it's too risky. And so, those are some of the decision points that you've got.
Okay. I'm going to fire a question at Peter here because it does mention me too before I start burning out my questions. We have James who's asked, sorry, not that one. We've had Sarah, I believe it may be pronounced. What is the difference between having a Me Too app versus having keypads to the meetings? Is the response rate better if delegates use their own devices versus keypads? You guys have gone away from a dedicated app to now a web version. So has that played a role in your decision making around that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think it goes back to what Chris just said. It's about environment, it's about the type of audience and what you want to achieve from it. Me Too only offers a mobile app, and as we've always said to our clients when we offered the whole range of interactive devices or apps, it's about using the right tool for the job. And I think we saw this when apps first came out, when event apps first came out. People thought they were the catch-all, they were going to be the solution to everything, and you'd never use a handset again. And actually, people got burnt by that because the environment wasn't very good for using these devices. Wi-Fi wasn't very good, 4G wasn't, didn't have such coverage, and so on. What we've seen, and why Me Too has grown so much in the last couple of years, is that environment is now changing and much more manageable, much more reliable, and actually people are demanding to use this type of technology. So it doesn't mean it's suitable for every environment. So there's the types of meetings like formal AGMs or meetings where we simply don't want people looking at their own devices, or they don't have their own devices, as Chris talked about. But where it is the right tool for the job, engagement rates are really, really high because people are using their devices anyway. People are expecting to be able to use their device in some way. And a Q&A session now is about having several lines of communication, and people do this when they watch TV. They have a back channel so they can talk about the TV program on Twitter. When you come to a conference, you want that back channel so you can have that conversation yourself, you can spark debate without necessarily interrupting things. So there's actually more content for everyone to consume and react to. So it depends on the environment. But in terms of the question of what are the response rates like, if you're choosing the right tool for the job, you've looked at your environment carefully, you've facilitated it carefully, we see the same type of response rates with a handset as you can get with an app.
Am I right in saying though that you've got web apps and you've got bring your own device and you've got all that solution, but for me there's two big potential problems there. One is battery.
Yeah.
People want to save the battery for things. They don't want to necessarily have it on airplane mode because they're saving it for later when they're on the train home, or they've been working on it all day and they're at an event at 6 o'clock and it's running low, so they're less likely to engage that way, whereas a pad's already charged up. And then there's also the security element both ways, access to my device and access outside as well, or even just distractions. So how has that played a role in kind of choosing? Do people take those considerations?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, clients who are organising meetings fit into two categories. Some of them would say, we can't stop our delegates our participants using their own devices. So as someone has said nicely here, I find that mobile works well as people get less distracted because you're taking the thing that might distract them, their phone, and you're making them use it for the meeting. So there are some people who accept that. We could never tell this audience not to have their phones out. Yeah. But there are a lot of meetings where the instruction is phones on silent in your bags, please, because you're here to participate in this meeting for the hour or the day or whatever. And in those situations, providing an app which requires people to get the phone out then gives them an excuse to do everything else. So there are still those two splits, those who accept that people will use their phones and a good channel therefore for Q&As through the phone, and others who say, no, the phones are away, you're concentrating, and therefore we have to provide you with a device in order for you to participate.
I think that also plays, and we've talked about the audience, and there's another question which has been upvoted quite a lot here. Somebody's anonymously mentioned that it depends. We've already discussed it depends on the audience, but what about the speaker? How often have you found between you that dictates a role in how the Q&A is done?
A huge part, obviously, on experience, and it depends how much control that speaker wants on the questions that are coming in. The great thing about, obviously, app work or using digital devices is obviously they can control some of the content. And also to help them, it's a big thing hosting a piece, is that it can be a team of people who can also be highlighting the ones that are really critical to the business, helping them, obviously, because if you've got a really active audience, you can have a lot of questions coming through. To be fair, how do you very quickly get to the right information, the right questions that really matter to the wider audience as a group? So how do you get to that information? Sometimes you need people to help, especially on larger events. So that certainly helps in terms of the speakers, but actually the confidence of the speaker, the experience makes a difference as well.
I'd like to share I don't think I've got a microphone here. Can you hear me okay?
I miss out a few things.
Okay, but by all means, if you want to move a little bit closer, but I'll try and speak up a little bit for you as well. That's thrown me off. What's the best practice? We've already touched on a little bit around it. We've got an environment where we decided we're doing Q&A. How do we encourage people to actually use it? What are some of the best practices we can use to not just get the tech, but get it used, get the adoption rates up, get the questions asked, get the information that we want, get the audience engaged further, get you engaged as speakers? What's some of the best practice when implementing Q&A that we can use? And then I'll let anybody go first. Peter, yeah.
Well, it's one of the things we advise a lot on, and the technology can only take you so far, and it goes back to the facilitator, the speaker. They're the ones that really put across how important this is. And I think that what they need to do is actually give people the information. So if you look on the slides that we've got here, we've got access to how you get onto the app, and I think it's really important to offer that really early. We recommend actually offering it before the event. Meeting gets used a lot for employee comms meetings, so you can actually ask people to send in their questions and comments before the meeting, set the tone, get some content already, and get people engaged and encourage them to come to that meeting. Then make it really accessible through the meeting. Tell people what's in it for them, so show them that this is going to be more meaningful if they take part by reacting to what comes through early. Don't just collect data and then use it in a report at the end. Actually let it shape the meeting as it goes. Just to encourage that participation.
Just on when you said about shaping the meeting, and then we had this discussion earlier, Richard, didn't we? Is there an opportunity that we can use the software or the Q&A platform outside of the live event? Can we use it before? Can we use it after? Have you got any examples of how that may have been used to kind of extend the lifespan of the event? And
I think one thing you've got to be careful about how you use it outside the event. Certainly posts on Peter's point there, asking for questions, depending on the audience. Sometimes the risk with asking questions before that it's disingenuous, and then obviously the answers are then preset and that it's actually not a live session, and are they genuine answers or have they been well thought out and actually well crafted answers? So there's always a challenge in terms of do you ask for information up front, but for extending the event certainly afterwards it's important. If you've got a great Q&A session to continue on, it's very hard to get through all the questions. It's very difficult to sort of facilitate that within a short session. How do you actually extend that beyond the actual event? But also you've got to do it properly as well. So you've got to make sure that people do see there's access to that information, that those questions are answered in the right way. And sometimes you have to promote that as well, because lots of audiences will ask for it internally and then maybe not go to it. So you also have to do a bit of work afterwards to show that they have been answered and there is access as a channel which to get that information. But to me, it's always worked in terms of making sure if you don't continue to ask those questions, there is a risk in terms of, once again, it's not particularly genuine because you've only answered the ones that really matter to you rather than to the audience.
Is there anybody out there that's really using Q&A after the event as well? You know, the event's finished today. I'm sure we're going to have questions left over. Have you ever seen anybody use the questions after the event to engage the attendees that have not been answered?
Yeah, I mean, we have done that with a number of clients where we've taken the questions that are remaining unanswered. We've then organised those into an interview, which we then run with the CEO, and that's run on the internal intranet for a client. So we've done that before. I think the thing that's important when it comes to questions, so if we take a look at the questions, you can all see them on your system just as we can see them up here. And if you take a critical eye at those questions, you probably find that there's 3 or 4 in there that you're really quite interested in hearing the answers to, even if you didn't pose them. But there might actually be quite a few that really, they don't concern you, they're not relevant to you or whatever. And I think trying to push too far that kind of let's get every question answered for every single person, the trouble is you get a sort of diminishing return there. And actually a lot of people just they don't really care that much. So what we try and do is to say, let's make sure that in the Q&A session we answer the most important questions. So things like a liking feature is a really good way for the audience to tell us where to focus our time. And then my advice back to the audience is if your question didn't get asked and it didn't get liked, it's probably only relevant to you. So make sure you grab the speaker after the session and just put that question to them individually.
And if that's
a little tactic, that's the use of a coffee break and makes the speaker feel loved as well.
Yep. And if you guys have got any questions for these guys after, they'll be outside having a beer or a coffee, I'm sure.
You're about 30 seconds.
A good example of that in a sort of digital medium was we run a lot of webinars as part of our marketing, and we ran our future forum the other day, and we did exactly that. So we answered the most liked questions. We'd set a time, it was only going to run for 40 minutes and not run over that. But at the end of it, we said, actually, if you want to stay on the line, there's still more questions there, and you can have that sort of virtual experience of asking us more questions, and we'll work through every single question there. But the main session is finished, but you can hang on if you like. And that was really good. People stuck around for another sort of 20, 25 minutes, and I think everyone felt satisfied that it had all been covered and nothing had been wasted.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point about online content as well. We're live streaming this. We'll have an audience there. We'll republish the content probably tomorrow morning after it's been slightly edited, so people who, for whatever reason, couldn't attend or didn't make it or even want to share it with colleagues and stuff are there. And then that begs the question, is there more questions than there? I mean, some of these platforms have facilities, you know, lots of social media accounts that we post to have facilities for question and answer. But I think that also gives an opportunity for us as an organiser to use the same systems to continue to facilitate that conversation. On the point of social media, what I've noticed about Q&A software is it's got it's very much like Facebook, but yet we're not at a stage where we're following the source of social media where they've then got other attendees potentially could comment or question and help each other answer those questions. Do you think that's coming? What are we gleaning from other technologies that we can include in Q&A to improve the overall experience and the return for the attendee? Anybody want to?
I mean, you've got Facebook and you've got a Q&A system, and if you want to have a discussion on Facebook, my advice is do it on Facebook. I think Q&A technology is good because it's very focused on Q&A. You know, Q&A is a part of a live event, It's a moment in time generally, and therefore it should be facilitating that particular thing. We've had a lot of conversations with clients who want to then take an app or a Q&A system and then develop it into an ongoing conversation. And the truth is, this is not where people spend their time. So find out where they spend their time, which is not a Q&A app, it'll be something else, and get the conversation to continue there. Now, threading that over, when do you move them across from one to the other? You know, that's when you need agencies like DRP to advise you on, you know, that whole strategy. But my experience of trying to extend even an event app and try and make it something that it's not a discussion platform, usually it runs out of steam, you know, after a couple of weeks, and actually better, while you've got the steam, put it onto another platform that's really designed for it.
So use that Q&A for that event and then
Move on.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We've got an interesting question here from somebody who's been upvoted quite a lot. Has anyone ever been burnt on Q&A over Twitter or other social media? Extends it for sure, but dangerous, right? So I'm sure you guys might want to answer that, but if anybody else in the audience wants to comment on that, by all means, if anybody else has been burnt or seen examples of being burnt, feel free to comment. Have you guys seen any examples of that?
I want to hear the person's experience. They've told us the answer.
Does anybody want to
Who can tell
elaborate
us?
on that?
I didn't ask the question, but I'm James from Glister, so we do this sort of stuff. We have introduced recently moderation for Twitter for exactly that purpose.
Yeah.
So the organisers can cut out and delete any unwanted terminology. But yeah, there have been occasions before we introduced moderation where people take a quick photograph of some peculiar comment and repost it, and our clients include the UK government and some sensitive areas which you wouldn't want public display. So we dealt with that ourselves, but I think it's dangerous to include both in that sort of arena.
Yeah.
You need to have a full stage somewhere along the line.
Yeah, I think it goes back to right tools for the job, and actually if the stakes are high and it's a high profile event, you need professionals to come in and facilitate this for you. And I saw an example a few years ago in Australia. I had Danny Minogue on stage, and it was an Ask Her Anything session, and they did it through Twitter, which is, you know, hugely risky. But what added even more risk to it is they put the Twitter feed live behind her, and you can imagine how it unfolded. It was pretty horrific, and those people may have been in the room, they may have been somewhere completely outside the room. There was no control over who was taking part, there was no moderation, and I'm sure she wouldn't have worked with that team again. So yeah, a few simple changes there, all using the right tool for the job. And moderation, we haven't got moderation set at the moment, but absolutely key to a lot of our clients. Really
Yeah,
important.
I think again, you have to profile the audience. My expectation of you guys is you'll all be adults, and yeah, there we go. But you do. It's only going to go on here. People are going to see it. But I think, yeah, you have to. My experience, if you have to understand who your audience is, and it's always a fail-safe just to have somebody there to moderate it who understands what you're trying to put across. We've had before questions that are just non-relevant to the situation, even possibly that person's in the wrong room. So, you know, it would be easier to take that out just to keep the flow of the conversation going. We've talked quite a lot about at the event. Is there any examples of where we can use the tools for Q&A throughout the year that are going to give us the opportunity to keep coming back and engaging and retouching with our audience and keep them engaged? Is there any examples of how that's been used by an organiser, or have you guys used that as an agency in this?
Yeah, I think sort of looking at sort of what Q&A is, which is actually from an internal perspective, and a lot of our corporate clients, is about creating more of a cultural openness. So actually, if you're doing a Q&A session, it shouldn't just be just to get questions and answers. It's actually about empowering an audience and actually shifting the control. You know, I'd argue the point that, Adam, you should be sat down there and on behalf of the audience asking us the questions. That point where actually it feels very much they're in control. And if you're creating that culture of openness and open conversation and two-way conversation, then it's a shame just to do it one event and stop it. Mm-hmm. So certainly on some of the work we do on quarterly comms work, that very much if you're just going to do it once, you should consider about not just that one-off time, how do you do it throughout that 12-month period or beyond? And it becomes actually part of the expectation. There's always a challenge in terms of, do you do something different in the way you do Q&A each time? But the fact you continue doing it, it's not just we've done it just to show the audience that we want to ask a few questions, we're moving on. It should be seen as part of the culture of the business.
Yeah, we had a speaker at Event Tech Live 2 years ago, a guy called Julius Solaris, who wanted to do something with us, but didn't necessarily want to do the same stuff he'd already done at other events recently, and he didn't particularly have any new presentations or any new content to share with the industry. So he approached me and said, we'll work with you, I'll do a session, but I haven't got nothing, so come up with an idea. So part of what I love, and I think this is where we can extend it online, is Reddit AMAs, Ask Me Anything. Generally get a celebrity in place. It's an opportunity for an hour, 2 hours, for the industry or for anybody who's a fan, etc., to just fire questions at him. They'll pick them out and answer them. So I pitched this idea to him. I was like, right, we'll do a full Q&A session. No presentation, no start. It's just, we're going to stick you on a stage, open the Q&A software, and hopefully the questions will flood in. He honestly opened up to me and said, that's going to really put me out of my comfort zone because I'm going to stand there and either it's going to go well, I'm going to stand there for an hour and literally have nothing to say. Luckily, the software, the solution, and I suppose the audience really took to that. And he came out of the other side and said it was one of the most engaging sessions he feels that he delivered because he was just answering the questions that the audience wants to answer. The overall thing was event technology, so it could have gone anyway. It could have gone to VR, apps, etc. And I think it did, to be honest with you. But the audience ultimately got what they want. And I felt that was a really different way of doing things in terms of, I've been at so many sessions, great presentations, can't fault the speaker, can't fault the presentation, really informative. But then all of a sudden, the last 10 minutes, there's this rush of everybody trying to get that extra bit of information, that tidbit that they've turned up for and has not quite been delivered in the presentation or they want expansion on. And that's what I would suggest anybody in the audience who's not done a session like that, just try it. Pick a confident speaker, pick a really, your top line subject matter, throw somebody up there. Which is probably what we should have done with this, to be fair. I should have, like you said, Richard, I should have sat down there and just let you answer questions that they fired at you.
Yeah. I think to make that work, you've got to have the right person that's got a broad enough spectrum of answers to cover all that. So it depends how specific or narrow the subject may be to make sure that does work. But once again, it's a great way to empower an audience to actually put them in control of the session rather than the speaker. So if you've got the right person on stage that can cope with that, then I think it'd be quite a dynamic session.
We've done something that's similar. But just has a little bit more structure to it. I think the thing with Q&A is in certain sessions with Julian, who's very well known and very well read and done lots of research, you can do that sort of session, but you probably couldn't do it every time he comes on stage. Q&A is good, but it inherently lacks a bit of structure. The audience don't know what each other's asked and you're not really going in a direction. So quite often you want something that's got a little bit more structure and then it's enhanced by Q&A afterwards. So an example that brings a couple of these topics together is that we actually worked with Pete on this a few weeks ago, a CEO whose name I can't unfortunately reveal, but a CEO in their first occasion of meeting their staff used Me Too as the way to facilitate a Q&A with them. But rather than just doing a webcast and getting questions, we actually opened Me Too early. People could submit questions, and they did in their numbers. We had something like 200 or 300 questions. Those questions were analysed and grouped down into some themes. And then the themes were the opening vote of the 1 hour webinar. So the themes were introduced. They were based on questions that had come in from the audience. And the audience was asked to pick which two they wanted her to talk about. And so it was a kind of a Q&A. It was kind of the audience in control, but it had a bit of structure. It wasn't a complete riot, and actually was extremely well received and a format that works really nicely.
Are you seeing more of that? Is that something new, relatively?
Yeah,
new,
so it works really well. No, I mean, the first time we did it with a CFO at Microsoft in 2004 who had 150 slides and 20 minutes, and he couldn't possibly get through it all in time. So we said, why don't you start by telling people at a high level the 5 sections that your slides are organised into, get them to vote on where they want you to start in that presentation, and you keep going until you run out of time. I mean, that was the first time we did it, but that sort of thing does really appeal to people. They're used to red buttons on TVs, as Pete said. A lot of people are used to participating, and that's a way that you can very easily engage your audience and actually steer content. It's prepared content, but you can steer content towards the audience's preferences.
I really like that, because then the audience feel like they're playing a role in the actual outcome of the actual content, don't they? I've read a few articles recently about kind of like live presenting, which is just dictated by how a conversational presentation, very much with the audience. I suppose Q&A software can facilitate that, right? Has anybody else, Richard or Pete, have you got any examples of those Q&A sessions that you've delivered or been a part of that really stand out, that worked well? Have you got any examples to share with us?
Some of the work we've been doing recently, certainly on, and I think this once again understand the audience, is are they new to Q&A? Is it something they've done before? Is it something that they've never done? Which is that awkward, difficult. What does a Q&A session mean to me? And for some people, they may never even been in one in a sizable room. And how you can do Q&A, and we've done it a few times on smaller tables. You start off small, get them used to that, and you even tour tables and have some of the hosts that are on the tables, small Q&A, then you bring it together to a larger piece on stage. And they actually may be separate rooms where they're doing that, and then it's brought together and you make a bigger piece out of it. But it introduces a fairly sort of an audience that haven't got the experience of doing Q&A into actually really getting involved and wanting to ask questions and realising the answers are worthwhile as well. So it's that bit of, if I don't ask, I'm missing out. So I should be contributing to the session. Yeah. So that's worked quite nicely.
Peter?
I think we've seen lots of really exciting Q&A sessions, and I think even talking about Q&A, and we've got questions coming in saying what's beyond Q&A. And Q&A is still saying there's someone asking the question, someone answering it. It still gives you that kind of speaker-audience divide. And I think what we're seeing, like I said before, is the kind of the sub-conversation that the technology allows. And the technology should be something that just happens. You're not noticing this technology being used. It just facilitates a better conversation. And I think what I see quite exciting, rather than a meeting that we've run, I see the future of it being what you see happen on social media and so on now, and coming into meetings and events. And Twitter, lots of people were on there wanting to get organising their own votes. So it's crowdsourced votes, where a subject means something to people. They create their own vote and say like it for agree and retweet it for no. And Twitter responded by putting audience-generated polls in there. With Facebook having more than just likes now. Clearly, I'm not watching this, but on Love Island final last night, there was a national vote going, created by someone using those different icons. So people are willing to adapt the technology that's available to them to their means, to their ends. And I think that's the kind of thing we heard in our future forum that we want to respond to. We've got to keep this really simple, because this isn't a social channel, and people are very used to their social channel, so you can add quite a lot to it and make it quite complicated. We've got to make this something that people can walk into a room, having no pre-existing experience of this UI, to be able to work with, so we've got to be careful. But I see that's where it's going. It's the crowdsourcing, the sub-conversation, and actually the facilitator or the speaker almost being the sort of curator of that information, and just helping sort of push the right information to the surface, highlighting information, and actually pushing stuff back to the crowd. So we've got lots of ideas buzzing around our heads, but we've got to make sure we keep it simple, but respond to how people are already acting. And I think that's the key. The influence is coming from how people do Q&A in their daily lives.
Yeah. So the title of this session, I suppose, Beyond Q&A, how can we engage attendees further, was left there to kind of give us the opportunity to talk about how we take that information and use that post-event. So we use Q&A right across Event Tech Live each year. And what that gives us as a publisher, as we do across event industry news and our other events, is it gives us content that we can look at. We can look at the questions, we can look at the language that's been used, we can look at the engagement, we can look at what questions rose to the top. And from that, we can then plan part of our marketing, our content and our editorial around that, to remarket to those attendees, to continue to engage them after the event. Because one of the things that events like Event Tech Live inherently suffer from is their yearly events. They happen once a year and they go quiet for 11 months because they deliver the event, they shout about it 3 months leading up to it, and then it's as if everybody's disappeared and nobody's ever around again until the 3 months leading up to the event afterwards. As a publisher, we take a slightly different route, is we look at the content that was asked and we go, right, how can we use that to keep talking to those attendees and engage them later down the line? That's produced webinars from us, that's produced Event Tech Talks for us, because we've been able to see what's been the most kind of questioned and most engaged at the event. And that's what's produced these events, really. And that's where I see it's the data, and it's probably something we've not really touched on this session yet, but it's the data that we can glean from good Q&As to be able to deliver continual content for the attendees after the event. And that's where that beyond part really starts to play a role. Let's talk a little bit about some of the data. What's some of the data that these guys can get out of a good Q&A session, a good Q&A system to use post-event? I'll let anybody start that off. Richard.
The information, well, I mean, first of all, when you're talking about analytics, really, there's one thing in terms of who's asking what question. So I'll bring it back to sort of our corporate clients, so internal, sort of who's from what area of the business asking which question. That's really important information, because actually understanding who's asking from what part of the business and what they're after is quite important. So that sort of information is critical, even to any information we can within what we can ask in terms of an idea of age and that sort of information as well, sort of what are they looking for. So it certainly helps shape in terms of what we do following the event. And as you said before, in terms of shaping what you're doing event live talks is really important. It enables us to actually create something that's more effective, and it's actually understanding the audience start to own those sort of events, the content. So it's not necessarily a business putting that out to the people, it's the people actually expecting it. So when I'm talking about creatively for an event, quite often it's how much of that's been shaped by the people that go into the event rather than the people that are putting the event on themselves.
For me, I think if we just look narrow at Q&A, I think we're underplaying what we can get in terms of insight from the audience. So we're using Q&A tonight. We also use polling, and I think polling can give us some really good insights of the audience. So let me give you an example. We're doing a program of events with a pharmaceutical company that runs an educational program with something like 2,000 healthcare professionals over the year. Now, a number of those healthcare professionals attend more than one of their events. We've been working with them to get them to really have confidence in using the voting proactively, not just to do a little bit of ask a question at the beginning, but actually to evaluate how much these doctors have learned when they've come and spent 2 days at these events. And the switch that we've hit just now is that the client is looking at creating a profile of every single person who attends their events and understanding through how they responded to the polls their level of knowledge as they leave that program. So they can create an individualized learning program for each of the doctors based on how they responded to the polling. Now that's an amazingly rich experience. It's an amazingly rich set of data that the client can use. They literally can say, out of these 2,000 doctors, these 800 would be safe doing this procedure and these 1,200 wouldn't, and they need more education. So it's that sort of thing that you can get in terms of the insights out of the data from technology and live
Quite
events.
scary that 1,200 doctors not able to do it.
And you know what? I mean, I did an event a couple of weeks ago and we ran 3 votes that they were quite difficult votes at the end, but they were, if you'd been listening carefully, you could answer them correctly. Got to the end of the event, it's maybe not a very good advert for me, but literally half the audience got all 3 questions wrong. And I thought, so what have you been doing the last day? You know, and are you now safe to go back into that hospital? It's really quite scary, but at least we know who got it right and who got it wrong.
Yeah.
It's a simple thing, but just evaluating whether people are taking stuff in is a really good starting point.
So that's probably more aimed at like the corporate environment where they're hosting internal meetings or with shareholders, stakeholders, that kind of thing,
Yeah,
and
or
need
with
that
customers
live.
or anything. Yeah, absolutely.
We've actually used the Me Too system in what I class as a bit of a fun icebreaker way through event tech talks. We're not using it on this session, but for example, last session, IoT, I kind of went online, looked at some of the kind of facts and history behind the term IoT and what it meant, and we actually used those as a bit of a, I suppose, a pub quiz without the beer, unfortunately. But we use it as a bit of a pub quiz just to lighten the mood, get people going and engaging in hopefully some information that they weren't kind of aware of before. There's a question here from James, which we'll probably use to round up the Q&A session. James has put, implementing engagement tech varies. Some are self-service, like I suppose Me Too is slightly self-service, and others rely on having a clued-up tech guy and holding the hands. Is this a major consideration when picking the technology that you're going to use, and what is the perfect implementation? I'm not sure we'll be able to say what the perfect implementation is, but do you guys want to, Chris, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is why we partner with Pete for the 99% of the events that Me Too support, I suspect. They can do it themselves. There's Wi-Fi in the room that's available and stable. The audience is using their own devices. The person who's designing the questions has had a bit of practice. They've read the cheat sheets and everything else, and they're good to go. They don't need any help. But that is not every single situation. You know, in other situations, you don't know if the Wi-Fi is up to it or not. You need someone to be able to investigate it. You don't know what questions to ask. You don't know how to coach your speakers. And it's always the bit that people always focus on is the software. They always say, what's the features of the software? And actually, the difference between a successful and an unsuccessful implementation is very often all the other stuff that goes around it, the devices, the Wi-Fi, what it's used for, how it's introduced. And all of that bit is the stuff that you get right.
I think if you apply however you've done events in the past, it's the infrastructure that goes in. You can apply it to the microphones that are on the table, everything else. It's all a level of risk and how much risk you're prepared to take, what sort of event it is, how high profile it is, and it's hard. There's a lot of variables to why you may choose to either take off the shelf or use something that's more specific with the support team in there. So I think you have to look at each one on its own merits.
I think the education piece is also really important. We mentioned reminding attendees that it's there, getting them to engage with it, putting the information up on screens and things like that. But the speakers as well. I think I've seen a lot of presentations where there's been no questions asked because the presenter has not engaged the audience to actually facilitate any questions, not reminding them the situation, or even the questions are up there and just totally ignoring them and carrying on his kind of.
And on the other side, I've also seen speakers that have got the tech in there, not used it, and quite often that can be down to the training. So if someone's actually hosting, but they may be very good on stage, they may be very good in a one-to-one, but actually using technology, speaking, and the knowledge at the same time, sometimes it's quite a juggle. So there's a little bit of rehearsing and practice, and actually, so some people it's just a case of sticking in the room for an hour and go, right, let's run a practice one, just so they get familiar with that environment and how it works, using the technology, thinking about the answer while asking the question. It's quite a complex thing to do, but it just for some people they just need a bit of practice at doing it.
I think we sort of relate what we do a lot to PowerPoint. We use PowerPoint a lot, but PowerPoint is a self-service tool. Anyone can write a PowerPoint presentation. You can learn it in 2 minutes, and you can run a live presentation. But you can run a pretty awful presentation if you've got bad content, your formatting's bad, you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know how to run it live. And then put yourself in a live environment where the pressure's on. It's a very different environment to be in. So the technology can only take you so far. It's back to the conversations we've had there. You've got to pick your level of risk, pick your level of expertise, how much resource and how much time you can put into it before and after, and that's how you pick your level.
Okay. We've got one question that's popped to the top here by Ono, and it's related. Do you think social media is important for engagement? Can we do a Q&A session on Twitter? And there's also a little bit in there, there's Me Too. Does that Me Too use social media, and if so, how?
So the short answer is Me Too doesn't use social media. We're all about control and simplicity and inclusion. So we talked about the adoption. What we focused on is trying to get maximum adoption and utilisation, which is done by having minimum sort of barrier to entry, get onto it very, very easily. Social media absolutely has its place, and it's something we'll look at in the future. But by its nature, it's only for people that are a member of that social network. The moderation can be an issue, and people have got different reasons to be on there. A lot of the time, these apps work really well because everyone's anonymous. So they're doing it for a genuine reason of wanting to know the answer to the question. Generally on social media, I mean, I know how I use it. I kind of want people to look at me and look at what I'm saying, or look at my business, or look at what I've been up to. So it's a different purpose. It's not that it's not a tool for it, but it's probably not the right tool in the environments we work in.
Yeah, the only time I've seen Twitter used as a Q&A tool is generally somebody with high profile. They've got a lot of followers. They say, I'm going to do a Q&A session, ask you questions here. And then they'll use some other means, generally video, something like YouTube or something like that, to go through those questions and answer, and very selectively pick out what they're actually answering as well. I totally agree with you. I think social media's got its place. It's probably not a live environment, especially using it as a tool to try and ask questions to you guys. I think it would be a nightmare to keep track of what's going off, what's popular and what's not. And social media is a total different landscape, isn't it? It's a different environment. So I think keeping it separate, even to the point, I think like you guys have not used any social log-on kind of scenario, because people are still wary of kind of handing over that information as well.
And there's certainly sort of, I'll say back to the corporates of that, employees not want to mix their social world with their corporate and their working world as well, so you have to be very careful with that as well, because the expectation is to actually get people pulling back from it rather than actually giving you more questions and engaging.
Social media does take a place in Q&A is allowing your speakers to go to social media to answer a select few of those questions that were left over at the end of the session if they've not had time. I think that gives both an easy way for those people to ask them, because generally got a social media account, and it also gives some profile to the actual event and the speaker as well as part of that. Hopefully a few extra follows and a few extra mentions and things for the event and such, especially if you're using the hashtag and things. So.
Yeah, I agree.
Before we wrap up, does anybody else have any more questions they'd like to ask? No? Okay. Thank you very much, guys, for taking part. If you do have any more questions, these guys hopefully will be outside for a little bit in the networking lounge. And we do have coffee, tea, and I believe some beer and wine on as well for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.